Hello and welcome to Insight Live, the expert's take. I'm Jason Rader. I'll be your host today as we talk about emerging technology, exploring the metaverse, AR, VR, the future of privacy, and more. With me, I've got two rock stars that are going to talk about this topic with me. We've got Matt Fadorovich, Senior Architect, and Joe Flynn, Director and Distinguished Engineer from Insight here. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
And Matt, we got to first say congratulations on your new edition. We had to reschedule because of that, but very happy to hear everything's going well.
Thank you. Everything's going well.
Awesome. So for those uninitiated that are joining us, we are going to be talking about AR, VR, and the metaverse, and hopefully a lot of metaverse action in this conversation. But I think to kind of set the stage straight for those folks who are kind of new to the topics, let's distinguish, because I think a lot of folks get AR and VR actually confused a little bit. Let's talk about kind of that, the differences between those. Who wants to take a shot at that first?
Yeah, I can jump in here. Yeah, so the way that we kind of set up the spectrum for AR, VR, immersive tech is, reality is on one side of the spectrum and it plays virtual reality on the other side, because it really is the farthest away from reality, right? It's placing a user inside of another 3D world or virtual environment that can mimic reality, but it's not quite reality. And then in the middle of that, we have another layer that is more holographic or augmented content overlays, which is augmented reality, nothing that really interacts with the real world. And then in between those two is what we get down to mixed reality, or what we're really starting to move towards, which is holographic content or digital content actually interacting with the real world around you. And that's typically what we call mixed reality, and the umbrella term over top of that. And that technology is really used to access the metaverse in some ways. I think all platforms at one point or another will access the metaverse because we just have so many devices that are disseminated anyway today, that any type of metaverse technology out there really needs to kind of fulfill the need of supporting all of those different platforms. Joe, I don't know if you had any other comments on that as well. But that's kind of
I think what a lot of people on the call may kind of understand, or what know the most of, right, is more VR, where you have your Oculus devices, your HTC Vive, and we're all getting around in the holidays, right, on who's doing a roller coaster, or who's walking the plank, and who's afraid of it, because it immerses you, and you said it perfectly, Matt, in that environment. You don't see anything else. And it's great for some people, but I think the consumer world, I think, is still young. You're seeing Oculus or Meta really drive that forward from a consumer standpoint. But now is where we're starting to see it in the corporate world, right? In the business world, but then expanding into the AR side. But Matt, I think you said it great.
So when you guys talked about metaverse, both of you just now, you talked about it like it's like the internet, or like it's like, is when we talk about the metaverse, do we mean it's this one place that all metaverse places go, or is the metaverse a kind of, could it be separate for different kind of providers? Is Facebook's different than Microsoft, for example?
Well, it definitely could be. I think there's definitely, in the start of things, the way that we're seeing right now is just different pockets of providers developing their own version of the metaverse and kind of where it's hosted, right? And that's pretty typical when we just think about like websites, where they're hosted and how they're accessed, and where the content is stored and stuff like that. I think the interesting thing as we move forward into the metaverse is going to be interoperability of content between those worlds, right? So like you say, Meta has, you have, let's say, a piece of content, or like a weapon, or, something fun you can use inside of my world. Masks, avatars. How do I move that into potentially Microsoft's metaverse? So there's like that technology that we're working on will make it a little bit more seamless, like the internet, because we can transfer things like images and videos and things like we do today. But it's going to take some time. But that's kind of the way we see it right now. It's just everybody going a little bit siloed, and then we'll build all the connectors to bring everything together.
Interesting. So what are kind of the emerging trends that are going on here? We had a survey that I'll talk about in just a second, but I want to kick off, like, what are some of those things you talked about as it comes into business? What are some of those emerging trends related to that?
Yeah, so there's definitely some regions that companies are exploring. The Fortune 500, there's probably 90% of them have either explored or are using VR, AR, MR today. They're definitely diving into a metaverse for training. When we look at consumer facing or customer facing brands, they're looking for brand engagement, where they start thinking about, okay, can we build a world that immerses somebody into our brand, where we have e-commerce? So we start thinking about e-commerce on that front. How do users use the metaverse for that? And then on the other side, in manufacturing, we have even more training, but we have quicker upskilling within tasks for new hires and old hires and knowledge transfer. You start thinking about the age gaps within manufacturing and all that knowledge that's left over. How do we store and keep all of that knowledge and then bring that into the younger manufacturing teammates that are going to be using that knowledge? How is that transferred? It could be used just within the metaverse. It could just be a full-on training, knowledge-based metaverse. So many different trends. Healthcare is using it for repeatable operations, viewing of new internal medicine that they've never been able to do before at scale, bringing things like MRIs and CAT scans into metaverse. Health metaverse is a big thing. So those are some of the trends that I've been seeing, talking to a lot of the big companies.
But I also think if you step out of the metaverse, where we're seeing the companies start driving, and Matt's priceless in these conversations, right, is if you look at the remote assist type of scenarios, where for instance, if you take a HoloLens, for example, where it's more augmented reality, where he said you can still see what's in front of you, someone can actually, for instance, doctors can see a patient, but then someone on the other side can see what that doctor is seeing and kind of talk through them real time, even draw. I mean, they can actually interact with what the other person's seeing. So I think the remote assist and training aspects of augmented reality has been a huge, since COVID, since the pandemic kicked off, right? That's been a huge push for training and getting people, since we couldn't travel, right? Getting people remote more involved in what's going on.
Yeah, and I will say one other thing, that thinking about those two topics we just talked about, the AR, VR, MR spectrum, and then these interests and how things are moving forward. Our devices are advancing at a rate at which they're not just going to provide one reality coming in the near future, right? So we need to start thinking about reality switching, and things like the new Cambria device from Meta or Magic Leap 2 are incorporating both VR and mixed reality or AR into their devices. So now we have a way of accessing not only the fully immersive metaverse, but we have more of the augmentation of the real world type metaverse structure that's available as well, which is more the remote assist side. So you almost get the full package in one device these days, and then what platform and industry, kind of dictates all of that as you move down the line.
Yeah, I think that's a game changer, because I think you kind of, in the past, one or the other kind of makes you have to choose. And we haven't gotten to that point where I think people are able to make those decisions very easily. And so they'll just wait until kind of the market works itself out. So I think those kind of multi-capable devices are the ones that I think are going to go for. And I think, augmented reality, to your point, Joe, I think that's to me, that just sounds so obvious how we can leverage that right now and today. The VR stuff seems a more kind of specific for certain types of environments. But I really think, we joked before we got on the show of, I haven't been shopping in like 2 years. It was like, I don't go to a store to buy anything anymore. But I do think the buying experience, it wasn't that I didn't like the buying experience. It's just, I don't like going anywhere. So having that kind of brand immersion type of stuff that you were talking about, Matt, or being able to go shopping and still get those things that I like and still be able to view them in a way that I want, but potentially augment, let me try them on. I bought glasses that way recently, which worked out pretty darn well. I mean, there's all kinds of really cool ways that we can do this to really allow folks to have those same experiences, because literally that experience was enhanced for me. It wasn't like I had to trade off anything. It was like, it was better, because I got to do it exactly how I wanted to do it in my pajamas or, whatever. So it was really a cool thing. But how does that, from an operations perspective, and now onto that survey, we had a survey that went out that said, are you using AR or VR in your business operations right now? And 46% of the respondents said yes, which I was super surprised at. 46% said no, and then the rest said they didn't know. So, but I was really surprised at that 46%. Do you think that that's accurate, or did we just get some savvy folks responding to that for some really cool places? Or is there like a misunderstanding or misconception? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty accurate, to be honest. I mean, I think, over the past, 3 years, especially since the pandemic started, there was a huge uptick in usage of AR VR devices, right? Like Joe said, remote assist with HoloLens was probably the biggest, uptick. We shipped a lot of devices within the first year to get people to operationalize teams in a mixed reality setting. And cleanliness and being hands-free was probably one of the biggest factors in that, right? So, for instance, in healthcare, like Joe was saying, having one doctor walk around an entire hospital while, the 10 other doctors are isolated in a quarantine room and one doctor is visiting patient to patient to patient, like that's an ideal scenario for potentially saving lives and saving on PPE. That's like instant ROI, right? So there were scenarios like that, especially for manufacturing as well, where they started introducing this technology. And I think, it bodes to all the training that we did. And I know other providers did a lot of training as well for these devices to push them into the enterprise market pretty quickly. And that's, I think, what secured some of the adoption. It definitely went a lot faster than I think IT thought, right? I think we were sucking in devices pretty fast, and their IT was going, whoa, how do we manage these things? Privacy, tell me more about this, which leads into some of the other topics we'll talk about. But yeah, that was, I think that's pretty accurate. It might even be higher than that, to be honest, depending on what device is being used and how somebody sees it actually being used. Because there are a lot of POCs, proof of concepts still going on, a lot of pilots going on still with just device and solution, and then new solutions coming out pretty much every week. So yeah, could be accurate. Joe, what do you think?
Yeah, I think just look at us at Insight, right? We're now having meetings in the metaverse, right? In VR. And we're testing with our team, and many of the teammates came in skeptical, right? This is a little weird, and you're an avatar, and once you get over that, and people actually enjoyed the interaction. Not everybody's comfortable in video. It's funny, like my daughters, I commented before we joined the call about the other TikTok and other platforms are always on video. But then the moment they get into a more formal environment, the camera's right away off, right? It's a completely different. And so bringing them into that VR space or metaverse as an avatar, you have spatial audio, you have hand tracking, you have movement, and it's a completely different experience. Like you wouldn't think besides just video back and forth. And it's been very positive on us. And I'm curious, we always talk about manufacturing and healthcare, but then once you step out of those specific use cases and into the business, like how do you get the advantage of a business where everybody's remote and a different experience to engage more in these conversations? Because I think people are getting fatigued on the whole video and the back and forth. And this is just another means of trying to drive that interaction.
Yeah. And I also did suspect that a lot of Insight folks might have filled out that survey. So maybe that's where we're getting some of that percentage from. But you mentioned something that obviously as a security guy, I care a lot about. What are the privacy security elements that we're not thinking about related to this? That, because in my experience, just in my 25 years of doing this, usually we try to see if we can do something and then we try to see if we can secure it. And that's typically how new things are adopted. So what are some caveats that folks should be looking out for? What are some things that consumers maybe should look out for?
Yeah, it's so obviously we had the really big one, obviously with Facebook and Meta, right? With the VR devices that required Facebook logins, everybody was kind of at odds with that. And privacy of your social accounts, because they do hold a lot of information on certain devices. It makes a lot of sense, right? But I think those were lessons learned for pretty much everybody in the industry to figure out, like, okay, we need to start thinking about this the way that we started thinking about mobile, right? Are we going to lock things down into certain modes of privacy like Apple does, or make it more open source, and let users have a little bit more risk for that? But they get an open device that they do what they want with it, right? So then it comes back to the business requirements of what does the business require? Well, it requires maybe multi-factor auth or a single sign-on or something like that. So how do we work with the OEMs of these devices to pull those in? And then once we have those pieces like identity management figured out, then it comes into leveraging IT to let them manage those devices. And Joe, I don't know if you want to go into some of our managed endpoint stuff, but that's like one of the biggest things that we've done for years with just other devices in general.
Yeah, I think if you look into, I'll start with the identity side, but I think one of the big asks that Matt and I ran into all the time is we talk about the corporate world. These were new devices into their environment. So Jason, it's kind of like what you said is we want to bring it in, but I will give credit. Many of the companies also hit it head on from a security standpoint. And identity was the biggest thing because they wanted devices shared. They wanted the identities very specific and have secure logins. But then many of them wanted a separate environment from their corporate environment. Like I want the AR VR devices over here. The identities over here, my corporate environment is on this side, completely separate, because it was so new. And I think there's a trust factor there on how mature these technologies are. I think from a management side, if many of these devices are now moving forward towards AOSP, right, Android open source project, which makes it easier because now you have the likes of like a Workspace ONE or an Intune is even now coming forward where corporate devices can enroll these devices, they can manage them, they can push down applications, they can secure them. You even have the abilities of like Workspace ONE's XR Hub coming out where in a VR device, you can actually customize the entire environment that a user sees inside of it, which is quite nice. So I think a lot of the capabilities, these devices are now turning into another endpoint for an IT to manage. But the thing you got to keep about it is you're not managing these devices in a legacy world. I mean, for instance, look at HoloLens. You can't use anything on-prem, right? Meta, I mean, if you look at the Meta products or Magic Leap, these are all moving towards a cloud-based solution to manage. So as long as companies modernize, now you can pull these AR VR devices into the same methodology and framework that you do Windows 10, Mac, Apple, Android phones, and everything else, which is quite nice. So it's moving into a more streamlined management approach.
Yeah, and the other thing I will say on the privacy standpoint, just from a data aspect of how things progressed from when we moved from like the PC era to the mobile era, there was a lot of privacy concerns around touches and how people were interacting with the device, right? Where they were touching on the screen. Well, that's the exact same thing we're going to have with these new devices as they're tracking your bodies, right, and your eyes. So eye tracking is big, right? So we want to have the data to collect, figure out what our users' eye movements are to make products better, to make field of view better. They're not always bad data collectors, right? So things like hand tracking, we do all the point-based hand tracking to make sure that within the field of view, you're getting the best experience and the most immersive experience, especially in VR, to interact with the digital world. And then, the interaction within the space, if you jump into something like Facebook, if you jump into Better Horizons today, there's actually like moderators in there to kind of keep you safe. And, we also had privacy just in the sense of getting too close to somebody in the virtual world, right? So there was like a big article about, okay, is it digital assault? What do we do about that? And it's like, well, okay, let's start building bubbles around, privacy bubbles around you so you don't get too close to somebody else or disrespect somebody, or, you want to turn audio video off, or you want to turn yourself off. That's another cool thing about it is you can just totally make your avatar invisible and just go enjoy the world and not have to worry about anybody else seeing you. So it's just another way of interacting. And, it's going to be an ongoing process for privacy. New things are going to pop up with new accessibility issues and new features that are going to come along with devices. So it'll be really interesting.
Yeah, being a gamer and playing first-person shooters, I can tell you they probably need that bubble to keep folks from doing some crazy stuff. Yep. But so what I was thinking, you probably have more control in a VR environment, but in an AR environment, for example, it's going to constantly be looking at where you look, and there's potentially things that you see that in the real world you can look away from that need to know or confidential or those kinds of things. Has that kind of element been addressed? I mean, back when Google Glass first got introduced, there were folks that when they noticed people had that on were like, yo, don't turn that on here in the pub or those kinds of things, because you've got people that might not be dancing with their partners in the rest of the world kind of thing. And those kinds of privacy issues, I wonder if you've got any comments related to that.
Yeah, I recently had this conversation with somebody within a product design team because it was of concern. And this has come up in the enterprise space as well, especially in manufacturing. When we think about the product and the process of building that product is very proprietary, but they want to do something like remote assist. It's like, okay, well, if recording is on and we're sharing the video, do we have just like a light that goes on that says I'm recording or using the external camera? And that's kind of what everybody does today. But I think there needs to be a better product design, especially when you get into consumer facing products, that it's more of a shutdown mode where it's actually like something that covers the lens to a point where when people look at it, they know that that camera is not pointed at them, because it will be on your head at all times, right? Lights are great, but it's, they're noticeable at some point. And yeah, the other technology that most OEMs were looking at is like, okay, well, let's use a little bit of AI on the device to like blur faces, or, if we're going to record, we do body segmentation where we just remove them from the frame, right? And just kind of black it out. There's many, many considerations when designing the consumer-based products. And I think that's why it's taking so long for some of those to move on, companies like Apple and Google reinventing kind of glass and stuff like that is, they're going to be used day in and day out. And it's not the standard mode of I'm recording you with my phone, right? It's just I'm looking at you and potentially recording you. So absolutely, that's going to be a big one in product design going forward.
Yeah, when I think about privacy and those kinds of things, I mean, like right now, I know a lot of housing developments are using cameras at the entrance to track cars that come in and out of, and there's a privacy concern there. And police cars do the same. They're checking license plates of all the cars that they drive by. And, from a security perspective, from a personal security perspective, that might be good to know who's around you or if somebody's tailing you or those kinds of things. So there's this interesting balance that we've got to make sure we're considering both sides of the equation when we do it, because just because we can doesn't mean we should sometimes in certain aspects. Yes, grabbing every face around you and comparing it to a database might make you think, oh, that makes me more secure, but it has a creepiness factor. But then again, the way that you're filmed going in very large cities around the world is pretty much, most people aren't aware of how often that they're hit that way. So there's a certain acceptance that's got to go down just in general. And I guess that's got to be met with the perceived benefit that everybody gets from using this. And I think that's where folks like yourselves evangelizing this and showing the good and the consideration is really important.
I think the acceptance will probably grow. I mean, because if you look at doorbells, everybody has a camera on their doorbell and it's recording everything all the time, right? And it's good or bad. I mean, I have one that the application actually has notifications from everybody in the area and what's on their camera, what they share, at least what's on their cameras. So, I mean, I think that is going to grow. I think the benefit now, I think we have a little bit of time for maturity, because most of the devices now are not as conspicuous as the Google Glass was. And if you think about it, looking at it that way, a lot of them are big units on your faces. But as that matures, I think Matt nailed it, though. We're going to have to figure out what's the best way to better understand how to do this. But look on the other side, right? I mean, someone can easily just record on a cell phone, too, without you even knowing. Sure. But that's the hard part. And it's that acceptance of it's probably going to happen. As much as we don't like it, but how do we deal with it?
So what's, kind of wrapping things up, what for the folks that are the 46% that haven't integrated this into their operations yet, where do you suggest that those guys get started? Let's take it around the horn. Why don't you go first, Joe, then Matt?
Yeah, I mean, so Matt and I are going to probably handle it two different directions, right? And me coming from a modern workplace end user side, I mean, definitely look at where the values, other parts of the business. There's always going to be specific use cases in manufacturing and medical, where no doubt the value there is a quick return on investment on what you can do. But then step outside, right? Where do you see more value here in trying to pull these technologies in? Because as much as we see them on the headsets today, I think it's going to start becoming more apparent. If you look at Microsoft is coming with Mesh for Teams, that's pulling our typical Teams meetings we do day in and day out in the metaverse. So I think you got to start thinking all up from a company-wise. I mean, to employee onboarding, training, and these type of environments, better where you can understand. Start with understanding the capabilities, because AR, VR, the metaverse, and then look into where the value is within your business across all aspects, right? But don't forget the end users at the same time.
Love it.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with Joe. I mean, I think, coming from my background in a gaming world, it's about building connection, a deeper connection, I think is a good way to put it when you're using it inside the business. I think, like Joe said, when we jumped into VR meetings for the first time, everybody was skeptical, but you get into it and there's almost like a sense of you're reconnecting with your coworkers a little bit more. And that provides a little bit more value in the virtual worlds that we can jump into and actually do things with again, but without leaving our homes, right? I think that was a big thing for some of us extroverts who wanted to get out and actually start talking and play cornhole with somebody again, right? It's like, how do we do that? Well, let's just jump in and play some ping pong or Beat Saber together, let's just go have some fun in VR or go to an NBA game, right? I had a couple of friends that purchased tickets for like $5 and we sat courtside and watched the game, in 360 video in a theater with a whole bunch of other people. So there's definitely that aspect of community building, what we try to do, a little bit more culture. We had the culture crew back in the day. I think that may be the VR culture crew these days. So, there's definite ways to integrate it that are not just more tactical and more connection building between your teammates that you have today. Collaboration is key. So it makes the world go around. So I'm hoping to see a lot more of that with all the new products and solutions coming very soon.
Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you. And I think, you guys both highlighted aspects that I think everybody needs to think about. It's not just the end devices that we're talking about here. It's the management of them. It's the infrastructure. It's the network segmentation that potentially needs to happen. It's the privacy and the legality and the, data sovereignty that potentially needs to be considered across all of these, which is why, you want to make sure that when you're doing this, work with somebody who understands the vastness of all of the things that need to be considered, because the worst thing is to kind of be able to roll something like this out and have it be poorly implemented that really affects the user base. And then they've lost confidence in it. And then it's really difficult to overcome that. So I think that, I'd close on that kind of aspect is don't just think of the end point as the starting point. There's a lot to consider related to that if you want to be very successful at it.
Well said.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thanks, guys, man. Been a fun conversation. We might have to hit this one again, but super appreciate you guys being here. It's been a fun time. And if you guys out there want to know more about what we do here at Insight, please visit us at solutions.insight.com and we'll catch you next time. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Jason.
Thank you.